Hey, welcome to the Mind Body Energy Project.
Hi, Yolanda.
Good afternoon, Tiffany. How are you this week, doll?
Just fantastic. How are you?
I am doing well. It was
Good.
quite a week.
Yeah, it's only Wednesday.
It's
Did
been
I,
quite a week.
did I burst your bubble? It
No,
has
no,
been.
no, it really has been quite a week.
It's
So,
been busy for me, and I've also decided this week to I'm not allowing myself to indulge in any adult beverages. You
oh,
know, yeah, or TV. I'm just
yeah.
kind of like cutting those things off this week.
So
So
are
it's
you
only
feeling
Wednesday.
any difference?
I feel good about it. I got through 2 days, which is good.
Hmm.
And I do feel like there's a clarity and a space that I get when I stave off of those things. So it's really great. But I also recognize that they're a really easy way to just like lean in when you're having those crazy times, right?
Well, yeah. Well, I can count on one hand how many times I have a glass of wine a year. I just, I just at this point, and this past weekend I actually did have a glass of wine, and it's been a long time, and it's like just one glass. I don't even have to finish it, and the next day I feel like I was out partying my life away. So
I
yeah.
can understand that.
But TV, that is my vice. Like at
Hmm.
the end of the day when I need to just disconnect from everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I took like a week off of that, that would be interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I'm trying to not disconnect this week, so which is
Yeah.
why I've put this. I tried it last week, but that failed. Not miserably, but it wasn't as comprehensive as I had wanted it to be. So
You'll have to tell us how that goes.
I will. I
I
will.
want to know about it in a couple of weeks. So I guess we should say before we get started, just so you guys, decide if you want to stick around or not, what we're
Oh my
talking.
God, don't say that. It makes me sad in my heart.
Listen, because we're
We
catching
maybe
up,
don't
so
need us.
they may be wondering like, what's the topic today? It's not about our week. It's about intuition.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we are going to talk to you about intuition today, but I wanted to ask you before we got in it, like, have you noticed any energetic shifts at all, like in your own space, or any like highlight with anything in particular?
Yeah. Well, last Friday I got an unscheduled energetic attunement,
Uh-huh.
maybe an upgrade. I don't know. I got that. And then I was pretty powerful. And then I went and got acupuncture and cupping
Yeah.
on that same day.
Oh.
And yeah, and that was Friday, and it just pretty much put me out. I had to take a nap in the middle of the day. And
Hmm.
then I went and grocery shopped, made dinner, and then passed out at 7 p.m. that same night.
Oh my.
So yeah, it was pretty
Well,
intense.
that's a lot to do in one day.
I know, and I didn't realize it. It wasn't until like I looked back and I was like, oh geez, that was a lot.
Yeah. Well, glad you survived it.
Thank you.
Are
Thank
you
you.
feeling good on the other side?
Uh yes, but there's still more work to do. I got a massage yesterday also.
Wow, you're
There's a
really
lot.
stirring things up.
Yeah, there's a lot in my physical body going on right now. So,
I see.
yeah. How
Yeah.
about you? Any shifts?
Uh, yes. I think I talked about it last time we had the ebbs and flows, that I was saying I was having like more intense dreams and meditations and like just some clarity. And in this last week, there was like a highlight around different types of relationships in my life. And like just the energies around those, which has been really interesting too. So yeah, it's interesting, like how we talked about for the patrons and the monthly update, the different retrogrades that are coming up this month. I
Hmm.
feel like I'm feeling them already. So yeah, it's kind of cool, interesting, observing.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that I have my intuitive mind to help guide me through all of this.
Amen.
That's what we wanted to talk about today. And it's really funny. I literally told someone that this morning, like, I'm so glad that we are aware of how to like tap into our own inner guidance. So before we go down into our personal experiences with the intuitive mind, I just wanted to ask you, like, when you think of intuition, or if people ask you what that is, like, what comes up for you, or what has it been for you?
Um, for me, it's just a knowing, and it's a just yeah, it's just a very neutral knowing where it's like there's not all these other things like trying to determine what my understanding of something is. It's pretty like straightforward, flat, like this is it, you know it. And typically um, it comes in as a message that's just very clear and concise and very neutral. And when I say neutral, I mean that there aren't emotions wrapped up in it. There aren't like either anxious, sad, fearful emotions, and there aren't like over joyous, happy, crazy emotions either. It's really quite literally in the middle balance of those two. And it's just, there's nothingness with it.
I like that you make that distinction, because I think a lot of people struggle with knowing, is it my analytical mind or is it my intuitive mind? And that's one of
Sorry, a bug just tried to attack me.
that's one of the good ways to really know, because our analytical mind, it's questioning, right? And there usually is some kind of feeling attached to it, some charge to it. And our intuitive mind, like a lot of times when things come in intuitively, it's almost as if something came through out of nowhere, or you're looking at it like, wait, am I making this up? That's usually a way of how you can know, especially when you're first getting familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, once you go into the cycle of like over analyzing and asking a lot of questions and picking it apart, you could end up derailing yourself from an intuitive message or an intuitive insight. So yeah, for me too, I think of it as like a layer of our, like a higher mind, like we have our analytical mind, which is very useful, but then there's this higher mind that you can access that is outside of all of your personalization.
Yeah. I was just thinking about why it's really important. I mean, we're going to get into this developing your intuition, but really getting to understand yourself and what your own intuition is because learning who and what that higher mind is really important. And I think that I've seen many people go through life without ever really plugging into that or, tuning into what the higher mind is. And that's okay. They might be able to navigate their life just fine that way. And probably some of them do without all of the angst that I seem to suffer. But if you are wanting to understand that higher mind, it's really important to try to understand yourself in order to get into that higher mind and know what you're really tapping into and dropping into.
Yeah, and I think that's why even like a long time ago we did an episode about like the higher consciousness and our ego, and that is, getting to know yourself is one of the best ways to really determine, because you start to understand your personal thought patterns and like your personal triggers, your personal behaviors. And so when some information comes through or you're able to access information outside of that, you're very aware that it's not just this like cycle of programming that you've been functioning from for a very long time. And one of the things too well, I guess before we go into like the how, I want to ask you too, like, and I also believe that everyone is intuitive. We all have a higher mind that we can access. And a lot of times our intuitive insights come through and often go unnoticed because we haven't learned to trust that aspect of us. And again, some people just haven't become familiar with that part of them. But it is possible to do. But for you, was there a particular time that you feel it was more noticeable?
Um, I've always been really intuitive. Even as a kid, I remember being very intuitive. But it became really noticeable when I started putting extra effort into developing it. And I think that we talked about this. Which episode was it? I don't remember. I don't remember which episode it was, but we were talking about like our journey through this and probably like 5 years ago, 6 years ago is when I really started to like make the shift into all of this. And it was kind of crazy and all over the place. Because it was almost like I'd opened myself up to be more hypersensitive, and then all of this stuff was flooding me. And not that I didn't recognize it as intuition, but it was almost like because it was such a high frequency of information coming in that it was kind of jolting my existence, and I couldn't really understand what it was or pinpoint what it was. Like, is it my anxiety or is it intuition? And I still struggle between the two of those things quite often. But it really turned on when I started to put extra effort into it. And I put extra effort into it because I started being more aware as well of like synchronicities or just whatever it may be. They were coming more into my life. So I was like, what is this? I got to exercise more of it.
It's interesting when you say that, because it reminds me of like, I also, I was always an empath, but I didn't know what that was. And I mean, now hindsight, yes, I was also very intuitive, but I was also introverted. So I never like would share necessarily what I thought or what, it was like a very like, I was the only one that knew like that there were things that would happen that I knew were going to happen, or, these
Yeah.
things. And then like getting into meditation heightened that my intuitive mind, and Reiki heightened my empathic nature, where I became more sensitive to energy. And even though I think that sounds overwhelming, like someone can hear like, what? I don't want to be more sensitive than I already am.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other side of that coin is you also learn how to manage that sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
So even though it becomes heightened, it's almost like it becomes more refined in a lot of ways, because you also learn how to manage it. And with that, I would say it's important for people to know that intuitively we receive messages in so many different ways. Because I think a lot of people hear that and they think it means you see pictures only, or you hear messages only.
Right.
But you can receive intuitively, like what Tiffany said at the beginning. Sometimes it's just a knowing. Sometimes it's something you feel. Like there's a lot of different ways of translating and recognizing insight from your higher mind.
Yeah. I feel I'm clairsentient, and
Mhm.
I get the messages um, most acutely through my primary sense is clairaudience. So I feel or not clairaudience, sorry, clairsentient. So I feel things in my body, which, given the anxiety portion of it, isn't good, as you know, Yolanda, because then I think that there's something wrong with me physically, and I go through this cycle, which again is part of the practice, is really learning it. And it's weird because even during Reiki sessions, I've had to tell people, this word came up and I didn't hear it. I felt it. Like I felt a word, and like, how do you even, and we've to discuss this too, like how do you even, language can't even describe some of the things that happen when you tap into intuition and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think I find myself saying often what I'm getting is, because then I'm not really pinpointing the sensory of how it came through. Because quite frankly, it tends to become like a hodgepodge of how information comes through, right? So
Mm-hmm.
initially for me, it was very physical as well. Like I could feel things or sense things, and but I didn't know how to translate what I was sensing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually what led me to want to learn how to develop my intuition, because I wanted to understand what it was I was feeling. And then as I was going through that process, I was in class with people who were very visual, and I thought like, oh man, I think I would rather see. But then what happened was I started to see and realized I didn't know how to translate the symbolism of things that I saw. You know what I mean? So I was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like, what? And then just through practice, I started hearing and receiving messages more like an auditory type of way. So I think clairaudience is my primary now. It actually is. But when I am relaying information to someone or receiving messages, a lot of times I don't even say that something's coming through intuitively. It's very conversational, where I'm just talking. And
Mm-hmm.
anyone who knows me knows that's happening, because like my head will usually be nodding as I'm talking. But it has become a hodgepodge, where like I'm kind of hearing, there's parts that I know I am seeing, and there is a feeling, but it's all kind of, it's like using all of our physical sensory we're
Mm-hmm.
using them all simultaneously,
Mm-hmm.
and so it becomes something like that for some of us, I think.
I want to go back and ask you, when was the first time that you started knowing that you were intuitive?
Mm, I would say probably when in my teenage years, but I didn't have language for it. Like I
Mm-hmm.
just knew that I knew things,
Yeah.
and I felt like uh, there was something like different about me. But again, I didn't really talk about it, and I didn't have any information around it. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say then is when I probably really noticed it. Outside of when I was really little, I used to see like this pink woman, see-through, translucent person in the kitchen. But
Oh, you just gave me the chills.
yeah, but
Well, what's her name?
I don't know. I would just sit in the doorway of the kitchen, just like sit and watch her.
Oh,
Um,
what did she do?
Nothing. She was just like flowy and like kind of like like this just
Oh,
flowy.
look
And
at
it was
these
like we would just like
goosebumps.
sit and look at each other. Yeah, no, she never said anything. Not that I remember.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I think probably, I mean, it's interesting now thinking with all the experiences I've had and as much as I felt and saw, especially when I started Reiki, I don't think I really accepted that, like, oh, I am intuitive until I started receiving messages more through a space of channeling. And the only reason that is not because channeling is like so great, but that just happened to be my thing. So I
Mm-hmm.
think once you start tapping into your intuitive mind, whatever your way is starts to reveal itself to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find your way of translating that just becomes comfortable for you.
Yeah.
And then I think that's when you start to settle into like, oh yeah, I do get information.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of, to simplify this a little bit, it's kind of like the love languages. I don't know if we've talked about that on the podcast before, but I know we've talked about it outside of the podcast. So if anybody doesn't know what the love languages are, I think there's 4 or 5.
5.
There's 5 love languages, and it's a great book that has made its way national bestseller, I'm sure, to some degree, and people read it and they start to understand that, oh, I give love this way, and I expect somebody to know that I'm loving them because this is how I give love. However, they may receive love differently. Like whatever their love language is, like it might not match up with the way you give love, which in reflection, you might not know, you might not feel like they're receiving love if you're giving, 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 and not getting back what you think is reciprocity or somebody having received it. But again, it's coming into that understanding of translation, understanding how it is they receive love or how it is you receive intuitive messages and vice versa. And also, they may be trying to give in a different way that you receive. So, one, understanding the different ways of, or just understanding that receiving intuition can come in many different formats, and toying around with what the circumstances surrounding intuitive moments that you've experienced, and finding a common thread and then starting to develop it that way a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. You just reminded me of, I guess this kind of goes into, I want to ask you about like how you learned to develop it or how you like work through the process of developing your intuition. And because I think it may help people with the things that have helped us. But
Mm-hmm.
it just made me realize too, a lot of times when people ask me like what opened me up, I always say meditation is the foundation because every practice that I've learned, every class that I've taken within this realm, but more specifically, when I did my intuitive development training, psychic development training, and mediumship training that I took, all of them had the foundation of meditation. So all of them were rooted in first, you have to be able to connect and like sit and be like open enough to be receptive.
Mm-hmm.
So meditation in of itself is a really good way of accessing the higher mind, just in of itself. But in terms of channeling specifically, a lot of people ask me like what opened me up to that. And I always say that it was this period of time where I would go on my Akashic records every single day for like 3 months. I went in every single day. And the more I went in, the more information was coming through and I was writing it down. But then after a while, it was like the words started coming out of my mouth. And then even when I wasn't in my records, just information would start flowing through in a very conversational way. But I knew it wasn't, it was like my intuitive mind, whatever, or other things. But hearing you say that right now, it just reminded me of, I feel like I've trained myself to get out of the analytical mind, even at a very young age, because I used to journal like in a diary, and then it moved on to, I used to write poetry. But when I would write poetry, I would oftentimes imagine like a feeling or a voice that I wanted to write from. So it wasn't necessarily just like based on my experience as much as like, what would that feel like if? And so it was like kind of like I would open up this space of like going into my imagination and this other aspect, like beyond my analytical mind, and just like open up to like this voice of like feeling coming through. So I think even before all of this, I did train myself in a way to step out of my analytical mind and go more into like this imaginative, creative space, which allowed me to learn how to be receptive is just the point, I guess.
I got that shit grin on my face when you said Akashic Records because my intuition told me that you were going to say that.
Yeah, it was a big one. But yeah.
I agree about the meditation thing. I wrote down 2 things regarding that, about how to get more into the intuitive mind. What helps me was meditation, and then the other one is observation. And I'll get back to observation, but meditation, I know that people have such a hard time with it because they're, strung out on the right way to meditate. And then they're like, I sit still and I can't get past my mind chatter. And meditation is so important because you're exercising the muscle of understanding how your mind works. So going back to I think it was our very first podcast at the MBE project was mind mapping. So literally just being able to sit, your meditation, being able to sit in observation of understanding the workings of your mind is like step 1 for meditation. And then if you start to understand how your mind works, and again, the mind is that voice that's like always there chirping, chattering, doing what it does, that doesn't sometimes shut up for the higher self to speak. If you can start to understand how that's working, then you can understand how to like quiet it down for a minute, or you can understand when it's not intuition and it is mind chatter, and you can understand what the difference is between those 2 voices. So utilizing meditation as a mind mapping exercise is super important. And then the other component, the observation piece, I think is just being very aware and mindful of your behaviors and the circumstances surrounding your reality, which essentially is just your life, how you're living your life, and being aware of how, if someday you're like, oh yeah, I knew I was going to run into this person. We'll play that back in your mind. Like, what was going on in that period of time? What were you thinking? Like, what were the steps leading up to that? And just being more and more aware of like, I knew the situation was going to turn out exactly the way it did, be it being in a relationship for 6 months and having gotten that message in month number 1, but, getting through all of that time and then looking back and being like, I knew it was going to end that way, but it's interesting, like all this stuff that happened in between. And here I am, like, why did that happen? What circumstances in between that period of time, or like you did get the signals and maybe you didn't act in the direction of your intuition, but also what other things arose because of that.
Yeah, you remind me of 2 things with that. One is I wrote down earlier, perceptive, like people who are more visual. That's one way of also recognizing like how you may translate the intuitive mind, like people who tend to notice patterns or symbolism in everything, like, there are certain people that they just do. And I don't think they may know that of themselves, like, oh my God, I recognize patterns everywhere. Oh, I, see the symbolism in everything. Like those type of things too may give you an inclination or like a insight around how your intuition may come through and you can translate it more easily.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are very like clairvoyant in that way, where they're seeing beneath the surface and they're seeing like how dots connect and this type of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Whereas again, like people who feel like the energy of other people, or they go in environments, what we call an empath, that will speak to you about like you may be more clairsentient, and so you just have to learn how to translate the energy that you're feeling. So the intuitive mind in a lot of way, or like even your intuitive sensory, I guess you could say, your energetic sensory, it's a matter of noticing how you are able to see, feel, or sense beyond the physical senses, and then start to notice how you translate whatever that data is. But environment, you reminded me of that when you were saying like, oh, if information comes through, and notice what was going on for you. That's the thing too. Like, do you notice when you're in a certain space or doing a certain thing that just you tend to get insights, kind of like how I always joke, like, oh, I was driving and information comes through, I get ideas. Or if I'm in the shower, all of a sudden I'm getting all this like inspiration to come through. If you notice activities that help you move beyond the analytical mind, and again, just be like this receptive vessel of just like flow of information, that may also be a good way of practicing or noticing what comes through when you're in those environments.
It's interesting. I want to come back to the environment thing, so don't let me forget.
Okay.
But I quickly want to touch on how you said connecting dots. I think a lot of people, they might be good at like puzzles, or like really good at connecting the sequence of things and then having an understanding of that, and might undermine that ability. They might undermine it as not being intuitive, that they're just good at puzzles, And I would say like, start, if you're good at that, like lean into that component of it and start to understand why you're good at puzzles, because I think that's something that can be taken for granted as an intuitive mind. So if you're trying to understand intuition and that's one of your strong points, like lean into that and start to understand why you're good at it. But go ahead.
Well, that specific part you said, it reminds me of too how I guess it's good for a lot of people to know as well that, especially in the beginning, a lot of times messages come through in fragments. So in a lot of ways with your intuition, sometimes it is kind of like piecing a puzzle together, or like doing detective work. And you may get, again, like, where you're like, oh, I just got a word, but I don't know what it means. Like, don't get frustrated or try to force meaning around it. Just like be patient, and that message may continue to unfold or reveal itself to you through other things or other exchanges, or so it's interesting as well that a lot of times our intuition, especially while we're developing it, it can be very fragmented and like working puzzles.
The environment thing is another really important thing to point out, because there are certain places and certain times, and I'm sure there's a lot of reasons as to why this is, but there's certain places and certain things you could be doing where intuition just kind of floods in. A lot of times it's inopportune when you can't just sit down and write about it. But I'm reading a book right now. I don't know if you've read this one or not, Yolanda. It's called The Biology of Belief. Have you read that? So it's written by a biologist, and the chapter that I just finished was, they were talking about how biology has made DNA this like superstar in the science field, and that DNA drives all of life. Like, it is actually like the factor that creates how life is planned out. But what they're starting to find is that it's the proteins in the environment that actually give the DNA its directions of how to actually be. Maybe the DNA is the direction, it's like the architecture, but the environment is what influences that architecture to express itself, how it's going to express. So I don't know why, when you were saying that, like my mind went to this piece where it's like the environment is so important, and noticing where trying not to force intuition like all the time in different places or wherever, and then being disappointed because you're like, well, I'm just not intuitive. Everybody's intuitive. You just have to find the right environment that influences you best, or the right behavior, or what is the word I'm looking for? I don't know. It could be like when you're riding a bicycle or something, but whatever works for you.
Yeah, I was thinking of how, I think I shared this last week when we were talking, how I meditate in the same chair for years.
Yeah.
And like, as soon as I sit in that chair now, because of the energy I've built up in there, it's like I can click into like that intuitive space, like just, almost immediate. But that is what I've noticed, that now I'm able to, it's like you start to recognize how you personally get in that space. And it's like retraining the self, like literally, like you're like taking a roadmap. So say if you do have a place where you meditate and your intention is to connect with yourself, and then in that space you're allowing information to come through again and again, you're creating like a literal roadmap for yourself, like point A to point B, like this is where I go from here up into my intuitive mind, or allowing myself to access this information. And when you've made that impression or imprint enough, and it could be something like you go in your Akashic records over again, you're creating a roadmap, or you, whatever practice you use to access your intuitive mind, you'll get to a point to where you don't need that roadmap anymore. And then it's just, you're just there. So that's also, I say that to say your consistent practice is important. If it's something that you truly want to work with in a consistent way, it's something you want to really be dedicated about.
Yeah. And not judging the process too is really important.
Yeah.
Because if you sit for 10 days and you think like, I keep doing what you said, I did it 10 days in a row and nothing's coming, the judgment is going to really cloud any information that you're getting.
Yeah. And, again, like even for one of the things, and I can't say going in my Akashic records every day wasn't the thing that opened me up, but it was something that opened me up to a particular way of receiving my intuitive insights. And I did that every day for 3 months. I mean, that's a pretty long time. Do you know what I mean? Like every single day, like I didn't miss a day. And even if I didn't go in with a question, I still did that. I still followed that roadmap for myself again and again. And I wasn't doing it intending to open up to anything else. It just happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you as well, and it kind of goes with what I just said, how has it changed for you? So however you started to notice your intuition and when you started to develop it, has it changed over time?
I'll admit this. It's a little annoying right now because it keeps on being right.
You're annoyed that your intuition is right.
Yeah, a little bit, because I'm like, are there any surprises in life? And can I tap into like the really cool stuff that's going to happen? But I think that's going to borderline the manifestation stuff. Um, has it changed? Yeah, I mean, it changes all the time. It changes depending on what I'm going through. It changes depending on like what new lesson I'm currently existing in right now. It changes when I do need it to be quiet sometimes in order to like just get through my life without, I do need surprises sometimes. So like sometimes it does have to be quiet because, if you know everything, like what fun is this journey? Which at the same time too, that's pretty funny with its with its I don't remember where I was going with this. I don't remember. Is that enough?
Yeah, it'll come back to you maybe.
How has your intuition changed?
It changed, like I said, like from being, very much about my energetic sensory. That was primarily my way of being receptive to, you know, transitioning into becoming more visual and then more auditory. And but I will say what helped it to expand was when I got out of the way, because there was a period where I was trying to make my intuition be a particular thing, like where I wanted it to be visual or I wanted it to be, you know, auditory. But when I just allowed myself to explore what actually it was at any given time, then I allowed it to also expand and open up and become something more like refined, more textured, and all of these things. So I would say, like, if you are someone who is working on developing your intuition, try to not get in the way of trying to force what your intuition looks like or get stuck on trying to control what you wish it would be, and just allow yourself to observe what it actually is at any given time. And don't get attached to what it is, because it will ultimately start to expand, and messages may start to come in differently than they did initially.
That's a really good point that I think needs to be heard. That just reminded me of something I was thinking about earlier. I feel like for anybody that's listening that's not like super woo-woo or like really deep into this stuff, and they're just kind of exploring all these new things, and it's like this intuitive stuff is kind of, I don't know, a joke or like some like a manifestation of our mind. I'm not going to be able to remember fully, like I was hearing this earlier, but things like
manifestation of our mind.
What?
Everything is a manifestation.
Oh yeah, yeah. But things like quantum entanglement are very real, you know. So if you've ever somebody called you and you were just thinking about them and you're like, whoa, I can't believe they're calling me because I was just thinking of them. Like, it's not a coincidence necessarily. I think that people also like to think of intuition as not a real thing and that it is this just a coincidence. But we do share this one universal, powerful energy. And I'm a part of that. You're a part of that. Yolanda's a part of that. We're all a piece of that. So why wouldn't we be able to communicate with each other energetically in that way? And the things that they've proven in science, like quantum entanglement, I think is the perfect example that it has been proven that this stuff that, although it's not highly publicized research or, you know, something that we're constantly being shoved in our faces in the media, doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
It's interesting you say two things. One, it's funny you keep saying quantum entanglement. I remember one time I was having a session with someone, and that is how they were describing lineage healing. And I'm not going to get into that, but intuitively I was receiving messages around how this person was literally like in the process of healing through their lineage, and they compared it to quantum entanglement and how that is possible, like how we heal energies throughout our generations. But proof, what you're saying, it reminds me to tell people too, like a lot of people, especially that are very like left brain and very, you know, analytical, there is this want for proof. And a lot of times people don't trust their intuition because there's like no tangible proof. And that's why it's important to get to understand and become familiar with both sides of the brain, but also like the different levels of consciousness that you're able to access and how your mind works overall. And your mind is so much more expansive than just the analytical mind that you may be familiar with. So it does take a lot of trust in the process of it all, because you won't be able to necessarily prove everything, and not, especially not immediately on the spot, because you may have some intuitive insight that isn't proven for you until sometime down the line. So one thing that is also a good practice is when you're trying to figure out if what you're hearing, seeing, feeling, sensing, if it's intuitive, is start journaling it. Like start taking note of what insights have come through to you that you don't know why it came through. Start paying attention to like thoughts or messages or words that seem to just pop in your mind and you're like, I don't even know what that means or why. take note, because you may be shown later, you may get proof later of like what that was in connection to, or you might start having those puzzle pieces come in where you're like, oh, that's why this, and oh, okay, now I'm starting to create a clearer picture. But it is absolutely a process. So
yeah. And the process also is very subjective. You can talk to other people about their process and their intuition and read things online, listen to podcasts, whatever it is. You can listen to those things and you can try them on and see if that they work for you. But just because none of those things that somebody else is doing works with your space doesn't mean that you're not intuitive. And this comes back to really understanding yourself to the degree that you can identify where you're an outlier from whatever maybe you've been researching.
Yeah, that reminds me of the uniqueness. I used to think of like our intuition in a lot of ways can be as unique as our fingerprints, because I think, for example, like one of the places where I studied intuitive development, they had a system and method of how to access and use your intuitive mind. And it was very like, it was kind of rigid what their process was, like, you know, to color in like very particular lines. And I had a lot of struggle with being in those classes because I intuitively wanted to do things differently. So it was like the foundational tools helped me access my intuitive mind, but then how they were trying to tell me to read just didn't register or feel right in my being. So fortunately, I trusted my intuition, and then I would go home and just allow myself to be guided in the way that I felt guided. And then that is what helped me develop my intuition. So I say that to say too, just like what Tiffany says, there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of foundational tools that'll help you access the intuitive mind. But as you start to like practice and become more aware, there will be aspects about your intuition that no one else will necessarily be able to teach you. It's just about you becoming familiar with and understanding your own translation. And, you know, like say Tiffany and I both we're studying right now. It may come out that I'm more of a channel and she's more of a medium. You know what I mean? Those are two very different things. And so we would both have different ways of processing. And my point is what Tiffany is saying, like getting to know yourself and really paying attention to what seems to highlight for you is very important.
Yeah, because what some people are teaching might not align with your gift, your dynamic of the gift, I should say.
Yeah, no, totally. Like even I teach a online class for intuitive development. And I always tell people, like I stress and reiterate, like these are just tools to create your map of how to get there. And these are different ways to get there. But then once you get there, you have to allow and trust your exploration and trusting in your way. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, here's your map, follow, follow, follow. But at some point, you're going to open up to a space where you feel your own guidance coming through more strongly. And you want to know how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Empower yourself.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what all of this is about, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Empowering yourself in order to trust yourself, because we are full of all of the answers and wisdom that we need.
And I think that's one of the greatest gifts of the intuition is once you go through the process of training yourself to trust the intuitive mind, you're ultimately training yourself to learn to trust you and that you may not be doing already.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of modalities to train yourself to understand yourself.
Yeah. And all of these do, like really.
Yeah. And I was just thinking how some of those modalities we might not even recognize how they can be utilized to understand ourselves, you know, like even just like lifting weights and doing strength training, we think that we're just physically getting our body strong to carry through this planet. Yeah, that's a huge piece of it. But if you start to understand how you're building muscle and why your body's doing it because you're doing this other thing, you're getting into the brain of like how your physical body works, you know, and why do you want to understand how your body works? If something starts hurting inside your body, because it's like, hey, there's something going wrong, like go fix it or stop eating that specific food. It could be a really good food, like healthy food, but it might not be good for you, like getting more so in tune with your body that you can understand the messages that it tries to give you.
And that is the exact reason why I'm so passionate about sharing Reiki, but from the lens of like your self-connection, your self-development, because there's a lot of belief that it's just this thing to help balance other people. But like, to me, one of the greatest gifts of it is like your self-connection and how it teaches you about you and brings you into deeper relationship with yourself. But, like thinking of like tarot could be used to get to know yourself, astrology, same thing, yoga, everything that you can think of that falls under the umbrella of like even spirituality or metaphysical science, whatever. All of those tools and practices are ultimately leading you back into building a relationship with you and understanding your true nature beneath the layers of, our ego and our projections.
For sure.
Yeah. There's a lot out there. We're just sharing some things with you. So just to wrap it up, do you have like 2 or 3 tips for people who are wanting to start to develop or maybe strengthen their intuition from where they're at now?
Well, I think that this always comes in when you ask me if I have tips for people, but meditate.
That's me too. That's what I was going to say too.
Sit in silence. You got to get okay with that. And if you're wanting to be more intuitive or tap in or drop in and you're avoiding meditation because you're afraid of what you're going to see or what your mind is going to say, or like because you're afraid you're going to judge yourself for not being able to sit quietly, get over it. Because if you can't get over that, you're not going to be tapping into intuition as deeply as you want to.
Right.
And I said this one too before, observation, like really observe yourself, your behavior, things that are happening around you. Like don't just live in the world, but like observe it and observe your reality and your existence, because that's very telling. I know that leads to being responsible for creating your reality. It makes you responsible for everything that happens in your life. And that's going to maybe be a bit of a deterrent for people, but that's the way it is. So get over that too. And journaling also. I think journaling not only will help you connect dots if you're writing down things that have happened, but it also clears your mind to get any other mind chatter out of the way so that you can start dropping into that higher voice.
I would say the same things. The meditation definitely as a foundation. Even with you saying observation, it reminds me that I always tell people to really pay attention to their physical sensory. Like the more you pay attention to what you see, what you feel, what you smell, like really tune in and, don't just overlook these things. Like, deepening your connection with your physical sensory will start to heighten your energetic sensory. And then with the journaling too, absolutely. And even practice like automatic writing. You could do something like go into a meditation and then write a question on the top of a piece of paper. Go into a meditation, connect with yourself, and when you come out, just start to write. Just start to write an answer to that question without thinking. Just let yourself write. Don't worry about grammar, spelling, none of it. Just write, free write. Just scribble all over the page. And then go back and see what came through, because it may be very different than what you would have come up with. And that's another way of training yourself to get out of the way and be receptive to just allowing information to come through.
I dig it.
Yeah. So
that's your homework.
That's your homework.
Yeah.
Hope that you guys have fun developing your intuition. If you have any questions about it, we're here. You can go to mbeproject.com and email us. You can become a patron where you'll get more content from us anyway, or you can go to our Facebook page. You can reach out to us in 10,000 ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, happy intuiting.
I think Jupiter goes retrograde tomorrow, I think. And actually, if you want to know more about that, that's some bonus content for the MBE insiders as well. So
yeah, for Patreons. When we say MBE insiders, that means Patreons.
Yeah.
Patrons to our Patreon.
Become an insider. You could go to patreon.com/MBE project.
Yes, and send us any topics you want to hear us talk about.
Yeah, because we're going to be switching it up weekly now. So just so you guys know, we will be talking about a new topic every week. For our patrons, you will still get bonus content twice a month as you have in the past, and you will still get our Dear Diaries. So that will be the same, but we're going to talk about something new every week. So catch up, Buttercups, and email us your questions or share on our Facebook page.
All
Good
right. See you later.